So I'm happy to introduce Jing Chen, who is an assistant professor at Stony Brook University and also working at Algorand. And she'll be talking about Algorand today.
It's good to be a speaker in the afternoon because with the talks in the morning, we heard a lot about what blockchain is, what proof-stake is, what the Byzantine agreement is, what dynamic adversary is, so I can skip all this. Thanks. So I'm going to tell you something about Algorand. It is a consensus protocol. And based on the consensus protocol, at the product level, we have shipped out a public blockchain network that is now running. Everybody can go on and test and try it out. Today, I'm going to most likely focus on the consensus protocol side. But I'm also going to tell you something about recent development and the roadmap. And in particular, as a theoretician working as a company, I realized that I have to constantly wear my practical hat to remind myself that, okay, your design have to be implementable by the engineers, otherwise it doesn't make sense, and so on and so forth. So in this talk, you will hear me saying a lot about jumping in between these two, like in theory, A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z. In practice, D, F, G, whatever. So you will hear some of those differences. Okay, so I'll skip. Everybody knows about proof work and mining, and about the proof stakes. We have delegated proof stakes. We have bounded proof stakes, and Algorand's proof stake system, we call it pure proof stake, in the following sense: A, there's no punishments needed. Meaning that malicious behavior cannot do harm to the system following Byzantine analysis. Somebody may deviate from the protocol. We may see them even double signing on things. We do not punish them or take money from their account because probably they can't hurt the protocol, and that's a protection. And another feature is that we do not ask users to lock up tokens in their account, different from like bounded proof stake. So money is always at your fingertips. That design choice is that we do not want to give particular advantages to big stakeholders because it's like the more money you have, the more you can put aside without touching. And a poor user who relies on his balances in a bank account for daily life is very unlikely to be able to lock up something in the system without ever touching it for a long time. So to us, we always allow you to spend all the balances you have in the system, and it is whatever balance you haven't spent yet will end up being your voting power in the system. The assumption is that most of the money is in honest hands. By most, we mean more than 2/3, following the Byzantine agreement. And all the tokens have the same voting power, as you will see in our proof-stake design. There are not different tokens with different functionalities. So that's the zest of the pure proof-stake system. And in terms of the consensus protocol, it is permissionless, meaning that users can send up and join the system anytime they want. There's really nobody knows how many users, who is controlling how many public keys, how many users there are actually, what fraction of the public keys are controlled by honest user or malicious user, and etc. So the system is really open to everybody. And the adversary we consider is a dynamic adversary who can corrupt users and fully control their behavior, but then it cannot corrupt more than, say, 2/3 of total stake. And at some point, when it uncorrupt users, the user recovers to its full state and functions from there. So that's a dynamic adversary. The protocol, the Byzantine agreement itself is pretty simple. It uses an ever-changing randomly selected committee to vote on randomly selected leaders' proposals. I'm not going to dive into details about the voting and the quorums, but those are very simple steps. And there's no common clocks. Users do not really need a continuous clock. A user needs a timer. The timer only needs count for a certain amount of time and being reset and so on. So they just need individual timers. Now, what are the guarantees? We guarantee asynchronous safety, meaning that even the system is totally in asynchrony, the network is partitioned, messages may get arbitrary delays, and even in that case, the system still guarantees that there is no fork and only one block is ever certified at a certain height. And so the system is what we call partition resilient. Now, in terms of liveness guaranteed when the messages are propagated in the network and reaches honest users within a known time bound. Of course, propagation is a natural replacement of theoretical broadcast models, and in the blockchain domain, propagation is widely used. I want to say something about asynchronous here. We all know that by deterministic protocols in a asynchronous setting, you can't hope to get both safety and liveness together. So you have to go with one of them. Now, for randomized Byzantine agreement, there is a line of literature working on randomized protocols. There are randomized protocols that are achieving total asynchrony, in like polynomial time and so on. But the parameters there are not really what we want in a practical system. For example, a very recent work by Valeria King and students, they have randomized Byzantine protocol in total synchrony, total asynchrony. Communication time is n cube. Computation time is expected polynomial time. I do not really remember the formula, but they can only tolerate a malicious fraction of n over 10 to the 6. Meaning what? Meaning that if you have a million users in the system and you tolerate one malicious user. That was pretty up to date today about randomized agreements. So that's not really what we are looking at in practice. And here, we made this trade-off between asynchronous safety and liveness within, if there is a bounded time for propagation. Okay. Now, what is the structure of the chain, and how are the blocks generated? Why I want to emphasize the word chain? Because it's really a chain, period. There's no soft fork. The blocks are generated one after another, following the Byzantine agreement. Versus, we have been talking about the proof work and Bitcoin, and we talk about blockchain, but in Bitcoin, it's really like a tree, as we have seen in earlier talks. So there is a mining tree, and there are many branches, and you follow the longest chain, and so on. Now, what's the advantage? What the property that gains us from having this chain? There's no soft fork, there's no proof of work, there's no mining, and it gives us two things. One is immediate transaction finality. The moment a transaction appears on the blockchain, you can rely on it immediately. Another is that it's pretty lightweighted for a user to participate in such a protocol. Like I used to run a node on my laptop, even within a virtual machine. A colleague of mine pushed it to another limit. He set up his node on a Raspberry Pi, which is like very low-end hardware. It costs about $100. The Byzantine agreement. I feel this is the audience. I really do not need to say again what the Byzantine agreement is. Just want to say about, Byzantine agreement is a very important idea in the design, but there are many other pieces in the system that make the whole thing actually work. What are the challenges when we're just looking at the Byzantine agreement and trying to do it in a permissionless system? First thing is about computation and communication, that we really want to make it efficient because we are talking about millions of users and they are in the whole world rather than in a constrained, a very compact environment. But that's not the biggest challenge here. The biggest challenge is really that in classic Byzantine agreement environment, we typically study a fixed set of users. There are n users, and f of them are malicious. Say f is no more than, n is more than 3f plus 1. And this n is fixed and known in advance. But that's definitely not true on the internet. And for a permissionless blockchain, you really do not know how many users are participating, and you really do not know who is having how many public keys. So to conquer those challenges, so those are, Algorand's Byzantine agreement, pretty simple. You send 1 messages per step. And this is the proposer voting paradigm, and if the proposer is honest, you finish in 2 steps. And if the proposer is malicious, then it still finishes in expected constant number of steps. But I'm not going to say details about the Byzantine agreement, but the point is that it's still not enough to simply run the Byzantine agreement with 1 billion users.
Naive question. If it finishes in 2 steps, if the leader, the proposer, the main guy is honest, and the protocol actually offers you a new step further than 2 steps, then you're honest, you know that the leader is malicious. So should you not stop right away?
No, because you cannot distinguish whether there is a malicious leader or the network is partitioned. If the network is partitioned, it's possible for a malicious leader to actually finalize a block but hide it without telling anybody. And in that case, you really do not want the people to think that, oh, there's no block being generated and we should have a new proposer and propose a new block in this round, and then we'll agree on that. Then the adversary could release that block and you have a soft fork.
So it finishes in 2 steps if the leader is honest and the network is all right.
Correct, yes. The liveness is when the network is not partitioned. Yeah. Okay, yeah. The ideas of dealing with this problem is very simple. What about you just publicly select a set of users and let them be the committee members that run the Byzantine agreement? And this can be easily done. For example, you take a hash. You use a hash and you take the input with a user's identifier and the corresponding round number. Assume the hash is a random oracle. Now you get a random permutation of the users by sorting them according to the hash output. Now if you take the first 1,000 smallish hash, you are randomly selecting 1,000 committee members. So what is the problem here? The problem here is that by having a public selection, not only the honest user in the system knows who is in charge, but also the malicious user, the adversary, knows them in advance. And they can target those people and corrupt them. Therefore, by the time they are supposed to be in charge, all of them have been corrupted, and you do not have an honest majority in the selected users. And therefore, if we see schemes using public selection, typical assumptions are such that it takes a long time to corrupt a user. Long time is much longer than the time a committee is in charge. So by the time the user is corrupted, all the work are already done, and the corruption has no influence in the committee's work. We do not really need that assumption. And indeed, here is the adversary model. It can immediately corrupt any user. And once corrupted, the adversary can perfectly control and coordinate all the user's messages, including what message to send, when to send, and even to whom to send. And the adversary can attack the protocol, like sending wrong messages, deviating from the messages, and attacking the network, meaning like partitioning the network, deleting the messages. But adversary cannot forge signatures. That's a basic we need to rely on. That it cannot break more than cryptography. So the idea here is, well, pretty cute and very simple if you realize it. You realize that it works. It's cryptographic self-selection. Here's the key words is self. What I mean by self? Self means that each user runs its own individual secret lottery and selects itself to participate in the Byzantine agreement. That's sort of counterintuitive if you think about the physical lottery ticket system in the real world. Like in a physical lottery system, lottery tickets are always printed by a central entity to make sure that there are a certain amount of winning tickets and proportional to the large amount of tickets to be printed, and then the tickets are distributed and sold to users. Why we can't allow users to print their own tickets at home? Because if they can do that, a user may not print a single ticket, but may end up printing 1,000 tickets, and only shows you a winning ticket if it gets one, and hide the other 999 tickets. But with crypto primitives, actually this can be done digitally, which is very cute. So I'm going to say a little bit about it. But first of all, what is the advantage of this self-selection? The advantage here is that there is no communication needed for the users to do the self-selection. That a user self-selects himself. If he's selected, he sends out his Byzantine voting message together with his proof that he wins. So what does this buy us? This buys us two things. One is that the communication cost is low, that people do not need to send extra messages to figure out who is selected. It's just your own Byzantine agreement message together with your signature. The second advantage is really about safety, that because there's no communication, the adversary really has no idea about who to corrupt before actually seeing their voting messages. And the typical model about a propagation network is that, the moment you see his message, you of course know he's chosen, but then it's too late for the adversary to corrupt this user because he cannot call back the message being propagated. Yeah.
But if I have a winning ticket at home, I can be looking for an adversary to corrupt me.
If the time is long enough, for example. But here the steps are very, very fast, like ticking with seconds. Well, first of all,
the bad guy can auction outside of the system, saying, I'm willing to corrupt you on some kind of dark channel.
Yeah. You're basically talking about the buying votes in any election system. I think that's a problem the human being will have to stay with. Here we're not introducing rationality. We're talking about honest versus malicious. If a person is honest, means that he sticks to whatever the protocol tells him to do. And if he's malicious, he can do whatever he wants.
You're talking-
Yeah, we're not talking about rationality or game theory analysis about this protocol. We're talking about a user is honest or malicious.
I'm not passing judgment. I'm just trying to understand the strength of your statement about corruption or incorruptibility of your system.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, I understand that if I publish my winning ticket weeks in advance, like on other blockchains, it's more dangerous than a few seconds in advance. But there is still that possibility that I'm ready to be corrupted, and as soon as I have my winning ticket, I'm trying to sell it.
Yeah, very good question. That's why in the system, actually, a user is able to figure out that he's in charge of, say, the next round, 2 rounds ahead. Each round is about like 4.5 seconds. So you cannot really do it.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Furthermore, the incentive is built into the system. You should think that if you're a person who's able to participate in the consensus, this means that you're an owner of tokens in the system. If you cause damage to your to the blockchain, this is damaging your own tokens also. You don't know what the adversary is going to do. Maybe he's going to split it off into a blockchain where you no longer have tokens. So there's an issue here that, unlike proof of work, when people can do proof of work without being invested in the blockchain, here in proof of stake, you're risking your own money. So it's a little bit of a, this goes to the rationality of things, but it definitely helps in this.
I'm familiar with this line of argument, but technically, how long in advance or how long in the future does my stake determine my lottery ticket?
There is a difference between your stake determines your lottery tickets versus at what time you will figure out that next round you will be in charge.
Because do I have time to escape the system? And in which case I can get a lottery ticket, which is winning with nothing at stake, as people say.
You won't be able to know whether you have a winning ticket or losing. So the stake is about something like...
And you computed the stake using a snapshot of the chain weeks before?
No, it's a few seconds, she said.
No.
That few seconds is the time delay which I have between the time I use my ticket and between the time I know that I have one. I'm asking, when do you compute the stake? It's another delay, like you said.
The stake is a look-back parameter. I think it's about 80 or 100-ish rounds back. So a few minutes. And then I will talk about the random selection a bit more. Even though you cannot, this is how we design the system or analyze its security. Like 100 rounds ahead, it's very hard for you to predict what the randomness seeds will be 100 rounds from now. So that at that point, it's very hard for you to see you have a winning ticket. Yeah, this is the gadget that we are using to generate the lottery, unique signatures and VRF. I think by now, everybody knows about them. Unique signature is defined just as its name. It's a signature scheme, but if the signer executes the signing procedure with the same message multiple times, they always produce a unique signature that will be accepted by the verification algorithm. So you cannot just print your tickets randomly at home. And here is a little bit of detail. So let's say right now we are trying to generate block R. And block B1 and BR-1 have been generated. And then the system would deduce a seed from the first R-1 blocks. And this can be done by each individual user. And each user will individually sign it and will hash it and will compare this with a threshold probability for him to be selected. That's some system parameter. Question?
The randomness QR depends on BR-1 only?
It depends on several things. I think it depends on the past 2 blocks.
And that still means it only depends on the last block, because by manipulating the last block, I can manipulate this one.
Oh, no, it doesn't depend on the content of the block. That's crucial. Yeah. Otherwise, proof work, like honest user do not need to do proof work, but malicious user could manipulate the content and manipulate the queue. Yeah, that's crucial. So if he passes the threshold, then send a message and send the signature as his certificate, as his credential. Now that is, that prevents a committee member being figured out by the adversary in advance. But that, I would say, only solves the problem for the first step of the protocol. Because if this user is in charge for the whole consensus protocol, the protocol has multiple steps, then after the first step, what? What? I started, okay. Is that fast? Okay. All right, I'll speed up. I think we're probably done with the technical part. So what I'm saying is that this, if you think about it, it solves the first step problem. But after the first step, everybody sees the credential already and can directly corrupt them in the second step and the third step and so on. The problem is still existing. So what's the idea here is that the Byzantine agreement has another nice property we call user replaceability. Meaning that when there are multiple steps, we can do a random selection each single step independently from each other. And each step ends up with a random committee member. They may not have the same number of users. They may not have the same set of users. And the point is that it works because the Byzantine agreement does not have internal variables a user has to keep in order to make it work. You can deduce the next message by observing the publicly propagated messages. And then we can allow each step has a separate selection. And corrupting step 1 message users will not help with improving the probability of corrupting step 2 users, and so on and so forth. So that's a very cute property. Okay. I think this part is just about the token. So far, I have not been talking about tokens. I only talk about users. And here, in the 2 phases of proposing and voting, really, we're not really selecting users. We're selecting tokens. Imagine that each token has its own VRF. And a token gets selected means that its owner carries out the duty. So the selection probability in the first step is directly proportional to the tokens. And in the second step, about 1,000 tokens are randomly selected, and their owners do the job. A little bit of optimization trick is here that if a user had 10,000 tokens, you really do not want him to compute 10,000 VRFs. So the optimization trick is you can for a user, he can decide how many tokens of his got selected by evaluating a single VRF. If you think about it for a longer time, I think you can figure out how to do that. Okay, a little bit about the committee size and the quorum, threshold. Slightly different from in a classic Byzantine environment. Here we have 2 parameters we can control. One is the expected committee size, which will dictate the selection probabilities. And one is the quorum threshold, that among these committee members, how many signatures I need to see to make my next move. The conditions are set so that, with a given honest ratio, you choose these 2 parameters so that with high probability, the first condition is a safety condition, that you can't generate 2 conflicting certificates. And the second condition is a liveness condition, that even if the malicious users do nothing, and if the network is no partitions, honest users themselves can generate agreement. So a little bit of probabilistic analysis here. Well, still there are many other ideas for the ultimate protocol. Ephemeral keys, separating spending keys and voting keys, and erasing the keys, and etc. It's really feel like there are many gadgets in the system. Binding agreement is one important piece, and there are many pieces, and really you figure out one piece, there's another piece, and until finally you figure out the whole piece, and suddenly it becomes stabilized, and the whole thing works. So that's really how the architecture fits together. So a little bit of summary, on this majority of money, and there's no mining, so computation is pretty simple. There's no mining pools, and all the users can participate with their tokens, and forking probability. This is how we chose the parameter in the system. We fix what is the error probability we want to tolerate, and then we reason backward to set the parameters. And the parameter is pretty low. The probability is pretty low, 10 to the minus 18. That's sort of like the age of the universe. And you can basically reach consensus about the blocks while the block is being propagated. So it's pretty fast, and we tolerate a dynamic adversary. Okay, I think I'm.
No disadvantages? Only advantages?
Yeah.
That's a very good question. Right, a little bit of recent development. Well, I think we're all out of time. Okay, yeah. Okay, I think I already communicated most of the key ideas in the system. So I would just stop here and welcome everybody to check out the mainnet, which is already running.